The way we in the church have been meeting over the past few months is the same way everybody has, on Zoom calls. And recently we had a Zoom call for this region of our diocese, Columbia and Greene counties. And in that call, the vicar of our region, Father Anthony Barrett, who's the pastor of Holy Trinity Church in Hudson across the river, started the conversation off. And if you know Father Barrett, you know he's from England. So he said, "Good afternoon, everyone. Let's check in, shall we? How's everyone doing?" And the first person to share said, I am just exhausted. I am exhausted by all of this, all of the different challenges that we're facing. I'm just exhausted. And that started it off. Next thing you know, oh my gosh, I'm exhausted too. Thank you for saying that, somebody said. Thank you. Yes, I'm exhausted. Everybody was so exhausted. And let's review why, shall we? 130,000 people who've died from coronavirus. I mean, we're facing something that puts fear in us. That's exhausting to live wondering, could there be something in the air that I have no immunity from that I could catch? That's exhausting. Can you imagine how exhausting it is to run a small business? Maybe some of you here know that exhaustion. Can you imagine being a restaurant owner who every day wakes up and says, what should I do today? Bring the food to the curb, build a pavilion in the back, ask to take over the street so I can put tables out? How do you keep your business going? Every small business owner is facing exhaustion. Can you imagine working in a bank when all the PPP loans were going on? I know that we signed up for PPP loans. So did every small business and organization out there. Do you know that they were pulling all-nighters to try to get all those applications in by the deadline? Can you imagine any of the different jobs that people have? And then you think about your own life. How about parents? Parenting is always a tiring task, but nowadays it's unbelievable. Your kids are not going to camp this summer. There's no camps. They probably haven't been to school in months. They can't tell the difference between the school year and summer because it feels exactly the same. And parents who never dreamed that they would ever be asked to do this have been homeschooling their kids, teaching their kids at home. And that has brought up a lot of really funny things on social media. I saw a meme the other day that said, "They say it takes a whole village to raise a child. And I can tell you it's going to take a whole vineyard to homeschool one." We're exhausted. And here's what Jesus has to say in the midst of all that exhaustion. Come to me. Come to me. You who labor, you who are so tired, you who are burdened and exhausted, and I will give you rest. Just come to me. I know what you're carrying, and I want to make it easier. And then he says something interesting. Take my yoke upon you. And that is the first spot where people pause. Because everybody loves hearing, come to me and I'll make life easier for you. Come to me and I'll give you rest. But we're not sure about a yoke. Put your what on me? No, thank you. Get your yoke off of me. That's in us, isn't it? I think it's in us as people, and it's certainly in us as Americans. We don't want anyone's yoke on us. If you'd like to offer me some help, that's fine, but what do you mean, put your yoke on me? And I think that's why we need to think about what a yoke is, because a lot of us didn't grow up on farms. We don't know what a yoke is, but if you turn to the very back page of your worship aid, you're going to see a picture of a yoke. And when you look at that picture, you get the reminder that a yoke has two holes. So when Jesus says, I'm going to put my yoke upon you, he is not saying, here, take this rule, take this burden, take this domination. He's speaking from the other hole. He's speaking from the other hole and says, climb in here with me, and I'll help you plow the field. It's too hard to plow it alone. Nobody can do it. But with me, you can. Come inside. Take my yoke upon you, and I will give you rest. That's what he's trying to do for us, is help us plow the field. He can't take away the challenges, but he can Be with us throughout each one of them. That's why if you think back to a few weeks ago in the homily, we were talking about that lady, Edie, who went with us to Israel, who whenever you would say something kind to her would say, "Glory be to God." That's what glory be to God means. It means, I'm not the only one plowing here. You did a beautiful reading. Glory be to God. Most of the plowing was done by my partner over here. I was just walking along, but all the shoulder work, everything that was pushing that plow, that came from the other one in the yoke. And I think that is where we start to realize that there is rest available to us, even in the midst of coronavirus, even if we can't change this or end it, even if we can't fix all the problems. But that's why it's very important for us to notice when life starts getting really hard again. Because there is something that is pretty much always true for us. We are always going to find ways, consciously and subconsciously, to slip out of the yoke. Sometimes life gets really hard, and we'll stop and say, why is everything so overwhelming right now? If we pause in that moment, we will almost always realize we have slipped the yoke, and we were trying to do it all by ourselves. I got to go to a Alcoholics Anonymous meeting once when I was invited by someone who was celebrating an anniversary of their sobriety. She had 4 years without a drink, which for anybody who's ever had an addiction knows, beyond a miracle, beyond a miracle. And it was an anniversary night at that AA meeting, so there were other folks there too. There was somebody else who was celebrating 5 years, and there was someone there who was celebrating 35 years of sobriety. So it was such a joy to hear that, hear them talk about what it felt like, how they started off. And what they were doing in that meeting was they were celebrating the day that, as they say in the third step, they turned their will and their lives over to God. They stopped trying to do it by themselves. They stopped trying to use willpower. They stopped trying to outsmart their addiction. And they turned their lives and their will over to God. So get this. Also at that meeting was someone who had, as they say, fallen off the wagon. It was their first meeting back after having several years of sobriety and then having a slip. And you can imagine the feeling of that coming back. And he shared a little bit about what it was like to have a slip. And he said, I realized that I had taken my will back from God. I was trying to do it myself. See, when you give your will and your life over to God, it's not irrevocable. We could take it back at any time. And that's exactly what he was saying. I turned my life and my will over to God years ago, but I took it back because I thought I was smart enough to do it. I thought I got this now. I'll handle this through willpower and being clever. And he said, you see where that got me. So I'm back, and I'm starting over. And starting today, I'm turning my life and my will over to God. Take my yoke upon you, he says. Learn from me. It's too hard on your own. You've been laboring. You're burdened. Take my yoke. There is something in us that is always going to want to slip the yoke because we want to do it by ourselves. Because if we have to share the plowing, we don't get credit for all of it. So there is something in us that really likes pulling ourselves up by our own bootstraps. But that's why I think this scripture has within it some teaching that we really need to get straightened out in our minds over, because a lot of us believe that there is such a thing as a self-made person. And sometimes we see in our culture people who believe that, and we start to think that it could be true. Oh, that person, they had nothing and they built themselves up to everything. They were given no advantages, and there they were, and they did it all themselves. And what we hear in the scripture is that is never true. There's no such thing as a self-made woman or a self-made man. It's impossible. All of us go to kindergarten ignorant. We need an education. All of us are the sum total of all of the energy and education that's been put into us. No one raises themselves. And When we put braces on, we can't do that ourselves. Nobody manages their own braces. Nobody's their own orthodontist. When our house catches on fire, we don't put it out ourselves. We need someone else to help us. We need someone else to give us the way. And in my own life, when I was 6 years old, I started losing my hearing. I was going deaf. I started not responding to questions, and I was falling behind in school. And they took me to the doctor's office, and we discovered that I had fluid behind my eardrum. And that fluid was causing me to lose the ability to hear. So what did the doctor do? Drilled a little hole, put in a tube, drained the fluid, and now I can hear. I can tell you that if I had gone deaf, it's very likely that I would not be a priest today. I would not have been able to live my life the way I did. And I don't even remember that doctor's name. That doctor gave me my life back, and I don't even know who it was. There's not any one of us that hasn't had help plowing. God has sent people to be with us in the yoke, and it is in that gift that we experience God's own presence. 2020, man, this has been a year. Do you know we're only halfway through it? If that doesn't make you nervous, nothing will. But let's admit that there's a lot that we're getting to learn from this year. And this scripture means something so much different to us this year than it would some other year. We would have liked to have learned some of these lessons in an easier or a softer way, but we couldn't. So today, let's make a decision to turn our will and our lives over to God. Let's put on that yoke.